Okay. Wow, that's got some amplification. Good. I trust you can all hear me. And I saw some sort of looks around as to why you're in isolation. I believe it's as the microphones on this side aren't working, so it's nothing personal. So let's open. Thank you all for being here and for your contributions today. I'm Tom Bristow. To my right, I've got Matthew Birkinshaw, appointed to examine the Dacorum plan and incidentally the St Albans plan. Over there, I'm sure you have liaised with her previously. We've got Louise St John Howe, who's the programme officer. Anything to do with the running of the examination, that goes through her. There are some familiar faces around the table, so I can hopefully keep introductions relatively minimal, although I will cover a few points for those who have not been here before. Just in terms of situating ourselves in the examination, technically, these are stage 3 hearings, stage 1 being on legal compliance, stage 2 being on the Hemel Garden communities. Now we're looking at site allocations more specifically, and judging by who's here, we're all around the table to discuss Berkhamsted allocations, BK01 through 4, and then flowing straight on to allocations at Grange Farm, Bovingdon, and London Road, Markyate. So we're on day 14 of the programme. Tomorrow we're going to look at housing policies. We're going to look at overall housing requirements, 5-year land supply, and so evidently today, as in other sessions on site allocations, we're not only concerned about the justification for allocations, but expectations in terms of delivery. Before I get into sort of how things work, how Mr. Birkinshaw and I want to sort of address the questions that we've set out. Just 3 admin points initially. Firstly, and I failed to do this already, please keep your phones on aircraft mode, and the important thing is not to hotspot off them, as that interferes with the microphones. We've had some interference in previous days. If you need Wi-Fi, there should be codes on the desk for how to access that. Microphones are important for the live stream. We're being live streamed, being recorded. Tap the right-hand button. They may need a little time to warm up, but they're very important so that the camera can track us. Okay, I think that's everything in terms of housekeeping. Can I just turn to Mr. Layden, as we've done in previous sessions, just to set out anything we need to know from the council's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. So just with regards to announcements and procedures, we're not expecting a further fire alarm test today. We did have one this morning at 9:30, which I'm sure most of you have now heard. The fire evacuation alarm in the forum is a voice alarm system, and within the council chamber, it's also a traditional siren system. The alarm will announce that the building must be evacuated due to emergency. On hearing the fire alarm, everyone must immediately leave the building by the nearest available route. There's a staircase on the right as you leave the council chamber, or to the left and past the lifts as an alternative option. Please follow the fire marshal. If in the event of a fire you would need assistance in using the stairs, please make reception aware. The main assembly point is at the Market Square, which for those who are unaware, if you leave the council building via the main entrance and exit, you cross the pedestrian lights crossing, and a short walk along the main street will take you to Market Square. Toilets are located to the left after the lifts and also by the cafe on the ground floor. The hearing sessions are being live streamed and recorded to be made available after the session. Please be aware to leave the council chamber if you do not wish to be filmed. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So before we go around the table, which I think would be useful to work out who's here and everyone's particular interests in proceedings, just a few points that we want to make clear is that everything in writing can be taken as read. There's a lot of information and our role is to digest it and to consider it. Just to be absolutely clear, there's no difference as to how we treat any points, whether they're made in writing or in the hearing. There's a lot of information, so please don't repeat what we have already read. And of course, we can only do so much in the room, so to speak. We've got very clear views, in particular from BRAG, Berkhamsted Residents Action Group, about greenbelt boundaries, for example. So that is something that we will need to, well, almost have your representation in our hand as we go out on site. So there's only so much we can effectively do in the room and so much that we can discuss. Because of that, to a certain extent today, all the issues merge together. So although Louise has helpfully printed out the sort of the agenda based on our matters, issues and questions, because of everything we have in writing, because of everything we're going to see, we may skip over some questions, we may combine some questions. We use that as a rough running order, but that's just to explain why that is. And hopefully that's helpful for anyone that's tuning in to know that we have read everything that's before us. If ever you do wish to speak on a point, just tip your nameplates on end. Generally, we'll start the discussion, and I think it would be useful. I'm sort of looking towards Mr. Layden and Ms. Mitchell at this point, if we can approach this the same as we've done with other allocations. So just to get an introduction initially as to any sort of planning status, any developments over the course of the examination, and potentially any main modifications that the councillors sort of proposed in relation to particular sites. That'll be useful to situate ourselves. Just one other point from me, and I'm not sure if Mr. Berkhamsted has any more introductory points, but it's just to say that, I mean, in terms of an examination of a plan, we're not taking decisions on planning applications. So I know there's some objection to certain decisions that have been taken by whomever, but it's not our role to comment on those, to counter those. It's to look at the justification for allocations and the soundness of the plan. So with all that said, if we can go round the table, starting with the council, just to hear who's present and your particular interest in sites or a site or sites. So, Mr. Layden, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ronan Layden. I'm Head of Strategic Planning here at Dacorum. I'm accompanied on my right by Craig Howell-Williams, KC, of Francis Taylor Building, who's representing the council, and to my left by Ms. Keely Mitchell, Principal Planning Officer.
Mr. Harbridge.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Anthony Harbridge, Berkhamsted Residents Action Group, here for all sites, Berkhamsted.
Morning, sirs. Again, Hugh Siegel, Berkhamsted Residents Action Group, interested in all Berkhamsted sites.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel.
Thank you, Inspector. Jane Barnett, I'm representing Taylor Wimpey from Savills in relation to BK01.
Thank you very much.
Morning, everyone. My name's Michael Kitching. I'm a director with SK Transport Planning, representing Laxton Properties on BK03 and BK04.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Rebecca Taylor. I'm here representing Berkhamsted School Group on behalf of Laxton Properties in relation to BK03 and BK04.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any points arising, any matters of clarification, anything I've missed? Okay, let's go on to BK01 then, which is page 154, if you've got a hard copy of the plan. As we understand it, this land south of Berkhamsted, which has a very interesting site boundary, which I just want clarification at some point. We'll come on to this exactly which elements are proposed where of the scheme. But it seems, in terms of our starting point, there is a resolution to grant outline planning permission as we read it, and that's of November 2025, is that correct? Ms. Mitchell?
Yes, a resolution to grant outline planning permission with all matters reserved apart from the Chesham Road access to the site on the 27th meeting of Development Management Committee on the 27th of November 25.
That's all matters reserved apart from access. Is that right?
Chesham Road access.
what's the, so there's a resolution to grant subject to section 106. Presumably the section 106 needs to deal with what in particular? Is it strategic alternative natural green space by any chance?
So the SANG for this site is off-site, and that's been implemented. So the Haresfoot Farm SANG has already been implemented on a separate permission.
Okay, so now we will come on to how the sort of the SANG strategic alternative natural green space relationship. But what I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, in BK01, when we're on site-specific requirements, we're under biodiversity and green infrastructure, deliver SANG at Haresfoot Farm to offset potential adverse effects. As I thought about it, I thought Haresfoot Farm was part of this rather complex allocation, but that's not the case, is that? So I just wanted to understand, because you mentioned another SANG, the offsite SANG.
So the SANG isn't within the red line boundary of BK01. It's also separate to the Haresfoot campus, which is proposed to be allocated on BK04. So it's over the A41.
So is that Haresfoot Farm, as in the, sorry, I hope I'm making sense, started on maybe a hard note. The requirements for BK01, as I see, is deliver SANG at Haresfoot Farm. Okay, and I know BK04 is not Haresfoot Farm, is it? But it's Haresfoot campus. So my presumption was that the way that mitigation would arise there is that SANG would be on site. And I thought it might be the lone isolated element of Greenbelt, but could be wrong. Just looking to understand that, if that's possible.
So if I point you to paragraph 3.7 of the statement of common ground between us and the site promoter, so that's ED 12, and then paragraph 3.7, and that summarizes the position. The site benefits from an off-site suitable alternative natural green space, which is solely within the control of the site promoter, benefits from planning permission, and then the application reference is full planning permission. The application reference is provided in there.
And, sorry, if I may, just for a point of clarity as well, on the submission policies map, we do reflect Haresfoot Farm as a SANG within the submission policies map. And it is basically, as Ms. Mitchell said, it's between BK01 and BK04. But if you bring up CD 02.1, you should be able to clearly see the extent of that SANG.
And so that's the SANG. It's not actually part of the allocation.
Yes.
Okay, and that would be consistent then with delivering SANG at Haresfoot Farm in terms of a criteria. Okay, and I can see some nods there, so I'll take that as read. Okay. Okay, thank you. So in terms of, so we talked about the statement of common ground that's there between, and I can see a flags up between Taylor Wimpey and the council. Any other, just quickly, any other main modifications that the council are saying would be necessary to make this a sound allocation before I come to you, Mr. Siegel?
The main modifications we're suggesting are within our answer to question 6. They all derive from that statement of common ground. There was the Historic England request for a modification to this site, but I believe we covered that. The council didn't agree with that suggested modification, but it would be the same point that we discussed for previous allocations, where the request was to refer to the strategic heritage impact assessment in preparing the detailed heritage impact assessment within policy.
That overarching point, that's helpful. Okay. So just while we're on potential main modifications, if I can turn to you, Ms. Barnett, I know you in your hearing statement have set out some main modifications that you would like to see us recommend in terms of soundness. Given what we've heard from the council, are you now aligned in terms of what main modifications would be needed to BK01?
Thank you, Inspector. Yes, we're entirely aligned with the council in terms of the modifications set out in their participant statement to paragraph 6.53. There was this observation, Inspector, which you might have picked up from our participant statement about the retention of the existing access road within the Greenbelt. Simply that ARAP's stage 3 review identifies the whole of the site being removed from the Greenbelt, including the access. And we questioned with the council the function of that existing road within the Greenbelt in terms of achieving the purposes of Greenbelt as per the MPPF. It's an observation, not an objection, but I just wanted to raise that with you.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I know I've asked this before, but I just want to ask it again. The boundary that's there, and so this may be a question for you, this may be a question for the council. The boundary of the allocation, where's that derived from? So we've got two elements. We've got a sort of a main element with a tail. What's the justification, or sorry, what's the rationale for that particular boundary as opposed to any other boundary?
Inspector, the extent of the red line is the extent of TW's ownership, including the paddock area, which is to the far west, which fronts onto Chesham Road. So it's everything within the red line, which is in TW's ownership.
And then the kind of separate parcel of land we refer to is 4.7 hectares of land at Kings Hill Way. That was included within the site policy as safeguarded land to deliver biodiversity net gain enhancements. So off-site biodiversity compared to the developable extent, but because it's within the same ownership, it was included within the red line. If I go back to ED 12, further discussions based on the submitted planning application, detailed ecology surveys by the applicant from paragraphs 3.19 to 3.22, within that statement of common ground, the site promoter confirmed that that area is now no longer required. So we've agreed a suggested main modification that site-specific requirement should be deleted, and then as a result, that land is now no longer promoted for any other use, just to be retained within the Greenbelt. So that could, subject to your agreement, come out of the red line.
From my perspective, I think that would be useful. As I was looking and thinking, well, so you have an allocation for a certain number of homes, and you have a red line. What happens there? And I think that from my perspective, in terms of clarity and effectiveness, that was confusing, I have to say. So yes, I think we would support if that particular sort of isolated parcel of land is simply to be retained in the Greenbelt, it's actually not to be allocated effectively. I think that would be fine. I mean, one point, and I haven't talked to Mr. Berkhamsted about this, so he may raise an eyebrow or kick me under the table on this, but one point I had, just in terms of, and this isn't a point of soundness, just in terms of the inset maps for sites, it's quite challenging to work out where the Greenbelt is. So you have Greenbelt in an allocation, but then it's white land around that, or it looks like white land. So to understand, I was just saying, from my understanding, to work out where the Greenbelt was, you have to flip between two plans. It may just be something that the council wants to think about, because then it would be very clear if, say, the extent of the Greenbelt was illustrated on an inset map, exactly what's happening. I don't know, Mr. Layden, I saw some nods. But.
Yes, it's similar, I think, to a request to previous sessions. It's something we'll absolutely look into. It's for clarity on those maps within Chapter 12. We recognise that the submission policies map does show the extent of Greenbelt around the site, and obviously the adopted policies map with that. But yeah, I think that's a reasonable question, and it's something we'll look to take on board as we move forward with the plan.
Yeah, as I say, I'm not sure it's necessarily a matter of soundness because you can flip between maps, but just in terms of interpretation, that may be useful. Okay, over to you, Bragg.
Thank you. It's possibly a point of clarification or a question really, and it concerns SANGs and BK01. Under the, I think it's 156, 157 of the framework, under the golden rules, green space should be provided on site or off site within a short walk. And I presume it doesn't use the word SANG in the NPPF, but I presume that's what they're talking about. They are talking about a SANG. If that is the case, it applies not only to BK01, but other sites in Berkhamsted and in fact across the borough, because there are a lot of SANGs that have cropped up in the last couple of years. How many of these is Haresford Farm within a short walk of BK01? Or it's across the other side, as I understand it, the A41. Is it within a short walk of any other sites in Berkhamsted which are relying upon it? And as I say, this might be a question across the whole borough. I'm slightly uncertain about this because some people are telling me that the golden rules don't necessarily apply to Berkhamsted or in fact to Dacorum because the plan's not in place. So that's partly my point of clarification. But if the golden rules do apply, then I raise the question about SANGs, and I'd also subsequently raise the question about the affordable level of housing that's proposed in BK1, but that's a separate question.
Do you want to take that point? I mean, technically, because we're under the NPPF 2023 before the golden rules were conceived, that's what we're operating under. I don't know if the council want to add anything, but the reason I pause is there is a fundamental question in terms of, well, a suitable alternative natural green space is designed to divert people away from where they would have gone and trampled over important bits of habitat for the SAC. So it's a relevant consideration in terms of, well, is that actually a suitable diversion away from the SAC? So irrespective of which version of the framework we're under, the logic of what you're saying still stands, i.e. is what is proposed by way of SANG, suitable alternative natural green space, going to achieve its purpose? So maybe that's the thing for the council to reflect on.
Thank you, sir. Can I just suggest that the microphone is still on over there, if that's okay? Just conscious that the cameras will be tracking. Thank you. So just as you say, sir, you're absolutely right. In terms of the golden rules, it's not something that's subject to this examination in particular, as we're being examined under the 2023 framework. I think the point about SANG is a point understood. There's a couple of points on that I'd like to make. I think first and foremost, just to reiterate and clarify that there is public open space provision within the red line boundary. That's as you would normally expect outside of the remit of habitats regs and what's required in mitigation. So with regards to suitable alternative natural green space, it is there to be an alternative to Ashridge. And so in the context of, in terms of the Chiltern Beechwoods Special Area of Conservation, we're looking at an alternative to that. Now that is not on the doorstep of any of the sites promoted within our plan. But what we are seeking to do is put it within a proximity that it would draw some visitors from new growth. And that's the purpose and intention of that alternative. It's not there to replace either. And that's an important point. Second point, I think, is with regards to the advice we've received from Natural England and the approach that they've used as a standard approach across the country, including Thames Basin Heath, SBA, which is where we've drawn much of our guidance from on their advice. The catchments for alternative natural green space varies on the size that it'll provide, and for Haresford Farm, the catchment for Haresford Farm SANG, because we're probably going to be hearing a lot of Haresford today, Haresford Farm SANG, that's got a catchment of, I believe, 5 kilometres. So the fact that this is very, very close proximity to that SANG, and it is available, you will see from BKO1 there is a road that goes through BKO1 that traverses the A41, and I believe there's public paths that will take you down to that, but there's also the other accessible way to access it from Chesham Road also. But in any case, you know, in terms of mitigation and the requirements for SANG, us at the Common Authority feel that it meets the requirements of the Habitats Regulations Assessment.
And apologies, just to jump in there, as part of the outline planning application as well, we, Natural England have been consulted on that. They're satisfied. The applicant put in a full SANG statement within that. So the resolution to grant permission was based on advice from Natural England, who said they were satisfied with the proposed solution.
Okay, so effectively we've got your point, Mr. Siegel, that we'll take account of when we go out on site. We've got what Natural England have said in particular on the resolution to grant outline permission, and we've got Mr. Layden's points that would be appropriate. Okay, if I can just, and I know there are flags up, but if I can just follow the SANG issue briefly, if I may, because we're there. We have BK01 subject to the deletion of the island part of BK01. We have to the west of it BK02, and to the west of that BK03. To the south we've got BK04. To the southwest we have Haresfoot Farm SANG. Okay, if we just very quickly flick to BK02, and I know I'm taking this out of order, but given that we're thematically on SANG, we have the SANG there that seems to be the Hill Farm Gateway SANG. Now, we talked last week, no, the week before, about SANGs and the gateways and the difference between them. As I understand it, the gateways are related to Ashridge. We have the Hill Farm Gateway, which is presumably also related to Ashridge, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that's quite a way away from BK01, is that correct?
Forgive me, in terms of BK01, we're saying that would be mitigated by the SANG within the ownership of the site promoter. In terms of BK02 and 3, BK02 is a developable site. I'm sure we'll get into the detail of that, but that's not expected to come forward until the later part of the plan period. As for BK03, within the Statement of Common Ground DBC ED 14, so that's the Statement of Common Ground between us and the Berkhamsted Schools Group, we proposed a modification to say that the site would contribute towards the Westbrook Hay suitable alternative natural green space, which is within catchment and is implemented. So that's paragraph 3.13 and 3.14. And then because of that, we can bring the trajectory forward because there's a SANG solution available to this site now.
Okay, but that still leaves, is it BK02? So just in terms of a sort of a conversation between new residents, they will look around perhaps and go, oh, we could go into the SAC, or we could go to Blur for a walk. And the position is that people at BK01 would go to Haresfoot Farm, people at BK02 would go to the Gateway SANG, people at BK03 would go to the Westbrook Hay SANG. I'm just trying to work out, surely because they're all in the same area and there is a SANG that has got permission, I don't know what its capacity is. I mean, it seems like there are, as Mr. Siegel said, a number of SANGs, but just in terms of the logic of, thinking through where people would naturally go, is not the point in terms of soundness that there is an option for SANG mitigation. But do therefore the allocations need to specify exactly where that is? I'm just trying to, from a very practical point of view, work out what's gone on in terms of where people are likely to go. So don't know if you can help me, Mr. Layden or Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, sir. Yes, and I think there's 2 points on this that are important points. So first and foremost, it's before we adopt the plan, we need to ensure there's sufficient mitigation. And on the advice of Natural England, their request for us when developing this plan and finalising this plan is for any sites that are deliverable or identified as deliverable, they need to have a clear identified SANG solution identified within the plan to which they would relate to. And that would give the reasonable certainty that mitigation can be secured. And we'll say in the instance of BK01 that site has the benefit of resolution of grant, and it's also tied to a SANG that Taylor Wimpey are in control of, that they're delivering also. So that Haresfoot Farm SANG was something that they brought forward. And that SANG is also serving another site we may touch upon later at Bovingdon in Grange Farm, which is another Taylor Wimpey site. So when we're looking at our mitigation and recognize the constraints that the Dacorum had in identifying its own SANG solutions, we also had to put it out there in 2023. We need to look at a network of SANG, and it's that network of SANG that's an important consideration here, is that, you know, we expect site promoters to come up with their solutions, but we also look at other opportunities where available. And an important consideration when looking at our finalised plan is, while everyone has got a preferred solution, there is in essence a second option, and that gives an added comfort. So, for example, you will see BK02, while it's coming late in the plan, that aligns with our strategy to deliver the gateway SANG, which is when we expect that to come forward. And BK03, you'll see that while we were in the context, and I think our delivery of BK03 was pushed until after the first 5 years, I think, when we finalised it. They, as site promoters, which I'm sure we'll come on to in more detail, you know, had spoken to Westbrook K-SANG, so the Boxmoor Trust, who were responsible for Westbrook K-SANG. And that's another SANG that came forward speculatively. It's been, you know, identified, secured, and is now implemented. So it's a live SANG with capacity. And that gives us the option to say, actually, we don't want the stops ban from coming forward. And we put the hook within the policy that says if an alternative solution can be identified and agree with Natural England, then that would work also. So what we've got here is an ability to look at different SANGs and look at different solutions to help unlock growth and bring growth forward quicker. Now, there's other sites not in the plan that don't benefit from that position. They don't have, you know, they're not within the benefit of these active and live SANG that are available and with capacity. The final point, and it's a very important point about why maybe it looks like, well, this one's going to this one, this one's going to the other one over here, and this one's going down here. It's of utmost importance in the advice of Natural England that we develop a network of alternative natural green space. And it's the network that's important. So even though there may be some close to some allocations with our plan that are not allocated to, that doesn't stop them from using it. But equally, it supports the delivery of SANGs elsewhere and a wider network of really attractive alternative natural green spaces that people will have choice to go to. And that's one of the key principles of the mitigation strategy, is to deliver a network of SANGs that are of high quality spaces that this borough's never benefited from, that will seek to not stop people from wanting to go to Ashford, but if we can take 20% of people away, or indeed for those new allocations, putting them very close to homes, it's a greater percentage. But it's about, you know, not increasing the level of harm, and where possible, we want to not address any identified harm already. But I hope that's helpful clarity.
It is helpful. I think just so if I talk about our perspective, obviously understand that Natural England need to be satisfied that there's a network that in aggregate there's sufficient capacity. I think where we're coming at this from is there are some very specific requirements, and understandably, given what you've said, Mr. Layden, in terms of BK01 to BK04, but they all vary. And they're all also contingent. I think we talked about this in terms of when a SANG becomes available. So is that prior to occupation? Does that constrain delivery? And in each instance, I think BK01 to BK04, they're all different. So I don't know where in terms of where I'm coming out of this. I do wonder if the criteria need to be less prescriptive in terms of absolutely right that you satisfy natural England in terms of there is a network of available capacity. But in terms of the specific requirements, well, if it makes sense that any adverse implications to the SANG can be offset via provision at a SANG or something to that effect in terms of a criterion-based approach, that seems to be right, or else you do, and I can see where Mr. Siegel's coming from. You do get this strange situation where it looks on the face of it like the mandatory mitigation from a particular area is in a different particular location. So I think absolutely right to specify where the intention is, but not necessarily to bind to a particular proposal. I don't know if that is to introduce some flexibility. Maybe I'll take that away, because we had the debate, didn't we, about SANG previously at Tring. So maybe I just need to take this away and have a little think about it.
I think this is a similar issue to the issue at Tring, and for those people who weren't at that session, where there is a post-submission change or suggested change or variation to the policies where SANGs are concerned. Again, it would be helpful to have sort of a Tring-style note with confirmation from Natural England at this stage, not just on specific allocations, but on the strategy for Berkhamsted and how this all sort of fits together. If anything's changing, that would be useful.
I think this is a slightly different situation to Tring in that the change from the Gateway site to Westbrook Hay is actually a change from a SANG that's proposed to a SANG that's been implemented. So we know that that SANG catchment is available to that site and to BKO2 as well, should they choose to pursue an alternative.
It will still nevertheless be useful. And again, just you don't want to get to a main modification stage where there is an issue arises. I think for the sake of a very short, one side of A4, it would be useful to have their clarification that as a strategy for numerous allocations in this area, that they're essentially happy with that approach.
It's totally fine, we'll take that way.
Thank you. Ms. Barnett, let's hear from you first, and then Mr. Harbridge.
Thank you, Inspector. It was just a small point, just a matter of clarification. With reference to the SANG mitigation, if I can refer you to the Development Management Planning Committee report, paragraph 12.164, which identifies that Haresfoot Farm SANG is sited approximately 2.95 kilometres northwest of the site. So it's well within catchment. That's actually stated within the report. The alternative SANG, which was identified in the committee report at that same paragraph, is Castle Hill SANG, and again, that's within catchment, and both those sites are within TW's ownership, so entirely deliverable. And as we've discussed, and the council have identified, Haresfoot Farm has been consented for that purpose. I just wanted to clarify that particular point.
That's helpful. And so from your perspective, still, am I right in saying that the anticipated, so I'm looking over here to look at my plan, but I'm talking over there. The anticipated delivery is from 2027, 2028 onwards, as in the plan?
In terms of the SANG delivery, I mean, it's an off-site.
Sorry, in terms of the housing delivery.
Yeah, so in terms of housing delivery, we've set out in the Statement of Common Ground a build start in year 26-27 in terms of a house build start, and that's based on an AMR timescale, so from April 26 to April 27. From a TW perspective, we think that's realistic. We're moving forward with a very fast planning programme. They've had the site since May 2020. TW make money out of building homes, so obviously we've got to crack on with this very quickly. We should be getting a decision notice following the completion of the Section 106 by end of May, at which point we'll be submitting an RMA, likely for the majority of the site, but certainly for the first phase during August time, with an approval October time, and simultaneous with that, we would be discharging pre-start conditions. So I think it is realistic that we could look at delivering some homes during Q1 or a little bit over next year.
Thank you. Mr. Harbridge.
Thank you. I'm just a bit aghast about that. That's not why I'd got my flag up. I put it up 2 points. One was, you've gone on about the SANG. One thing about the model, and you've quite clearly put out how muddled their thinking is on the SANG, is this goes back to, going back to stage 1 and the site selections, and how, you know, all sites are not equal. Sites that are closer to the SANGs that they could use have been discounted, and you've had all the other developers that have had their land taken out have made the same argument that we've made. The whole process, and why this process is unsound, it's a prescribed process. They have a defined outcome, and every bit of evidence is put on a confirmation bias basis. But my original point of putting my thing up was, you were talking about the greenbelt boundaries, and one thing we can agree with, you know, Savills on, is that it seems absurd that they want to keep the paddock in greenbelt when all that it's going to be is plastic, concrete, and some buildings. It is not going to, and sorry, you said don't repeat what we put in the thing, but we've put this in the thing, but it is a point. What we understand, and we found out from this process, that sports fields are accepted in greenbelt, but I think a 3G pitch is a sports field, but that's surely not what is meant by the information. We're talking about natural turf and natural things.
So I'm absolutely clear. The paddock you referred to, that, can you point me to that on
the paddock is the one that's going to be kept in greenbelt, including the road.
So the paddock is, let's give them a name. It looks like a
It attaches the Chesham Road. Sorry, sir. It's the one that goes on to Chesham Road and runs along Ashlands Grove, which is the access road from Chesham Road. And that paddock is what they want to keep, including the access road, which Taylor Wimpey don't agree with. But they're keeping the whole of that in greenbelt. And as we said, it just actually reclassifies what greenbelt is. You know, it's going to be plastic. It's all plastic pitches, paddle boards, concrete for car park, and a road, and sorry, changing rooms.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite. Are we?
It's in there.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. Any comments? Yeah.
I think, Inspector, just to respond that the sports hub, which is identified at the paddock areas within the red line of the outline, planning permission approved now, subject to the resolution which was granted at Planning Committee November last year.
So just to make a point, that planning permission on the 27th was rushed through, and a special planning committee was formed to push that through, and there was 4 councillors voting on that. Ms Barnett does herself an injustice really in saying that she's picked up this on since 2020. Savills were here at the core strategy promoting this site then. So it's not like they've come into it, put it through, and they've put their back behind it. They've already had one appeal against this site, go against them after the core strategy.
Okay, let's put let's stick to the planning points. No, that's all right. I mean, any concerns about the council's conduct, that is not for us. But okay, can I just pick up on one point though? And that seems to be, I just want to be absolutely clear in terms of access onto Chesham Road. And I think this comes to a point that you just made, Mr. Harbridge. And I've seen it that, as I understand it, this site was not included in the core strategy because of access concerns. Now we're in a situation where it is included in the local plan. What has happened in terms of access? So I'm probably on question 4 now. So what has happened to change, if you like, that situation from one where it was found, and I think there's a representation that talks of the reasoning of the previous inspector who examined the plan. What has changed between then and now?
Thank you, sir. I'll pass forward to Ms. Mitchell if she's any points of detail on access, and particularly question 4, beyond what's already set out within our statement. But just on the point, I think it's an important point that, you know, the council did discount the site as part of the site selection process for the previous core strategy. I was not part of that, just to be clear. I don't think there's anyone here on that. So in terms of my knowledge and understanding, there's clearly others here who may have a bit more of that. But needless to say, I think there was the council's position at the time that it was not necessary to meet the strategy of the core, you know, of the requirements and the needs of the core strategy then. But we do recognise, I think from my point of view, and it's quite an important point, that things change over time. Then the housing requirement changes, firstly. You know, the need to revisit evidence, the need to look at whether constraints can be overcome is an ever-moving feast, and you know, is considered with every plan review, so that not every site is static. And our position may, you know, be the same as it was 10 years ago. It changes over time, and it has regard to the evidence. I'm conscious that I think this site was a site that legally challenged the plan in terms of the SA when the core strategy was adopted previously as well. So things change, and we're here today looking at a strategy to meet an increased housing requirement that's set in the core strategy. We revisited the Greenbelt, look at our evidence again, look at transport and access, and speak with our consultants. And I think, yeah, in terms of that, we feel it's sound. And in terms of transport and access, you know, without going into the weeds of an application, but clearly, you know, the county council are of the position that, you know, solution is available and can be accommodated.
So, I think that's entirely fair in terms of explaining that things change, but what has changed in terms of you said, you know, things can be mitigated, things can be adapted, you can make alternative provision. We got a very clear kind of position previously that it wasn't achievable in terms of access provision. We've got an outline planning permission. Did I hear that includes access or excludes it? It includes access.
So it includes in detail the access onto Chesham Road, but as part of that planning application process, the applicant worked with Hertfordshire County Council Highways to identify 2 further alternative access points to serve the site. I'll find the references in the committee report if it's helpful.
And I was seeing some nods from the back there. So just in terms of very simplistically, relative to the scheme that was assessed previously or considered previously by the inspector who examined the core strategy, we have planning permission that considers access off Chesham Road. We also have 2 further alternative or additional arrangements. What would you say to that, Mr. Harbridge? That there is a difference, if you like, in terms of the evidence that we have been, presented with relative to previously.
Well, yeah, there is no difference because they considered access at other places before. And they, even as far as ED39, ED39, ED40, I think.
Talk me through those ones. So this is the site selection additional document. What do you take from those?
Well, I take from those is all their comments saying that Swingate Lane was only good for access for public transport, and only Fieldway was only good for pedestrian access. That's what they were saying right up until the point that, to be honest, we put in our comments about the initial planning permission about the road from Ashley's Grove, because at that point, Ashlands Grove and Hearts were saying, okay, yeah, you can have a road down there, Hearts Highways, you can have a road there. But we pointed out that it wasn't wide enough to take the footpath and the cycle path. Now they've come up with a plan to take land off the school and provide the footpath and the cycle path. So there is no longer going to be a footpath along Ashlands Grove. It will be in the school grounds. That, when it went through planning permission, was just apparently accepted that they're at advanced stages, but no details could be provided. But that was enough for the officers to say, we're happy that this can go ahead. So they provided a different access there for pedestrian and cycles on school grounds. And they now say that the Swingate Lane, nothing's changed in terms of the fact that people are going to use cars, etc. They're now saying that Swingate Lane, which serves Thomas Coram School, is now okay for traffic, and Fieldway is okay for traffic when it wasn't before. That's the only thing that's changed. Their traffic study that says this ignores lots of traffic. What they've done it on people movements, and then taken the census figures for primary mode of travel. Primary mode of travel is a high percentage in our area by train as their main mode of travel to work. Unfortunately, that discounts how you get to the train station. Hearts say, well, that Hearts Highways say that information isn't available, but they know they've rejected it. By concentrating on that, they also reject other peak time travels, so going to school, little shop runs, service vehicles. They've ignored all of those. And then they've got a very successful 3G pitch and paddleboard system area in the paddock. And that, they say, we don't have to take that into account when we're doing the traffic survey, because that will not be during peak time. But peak time for these pitches and paddleboarding is between 3:30 and 9 o'clock at night. So there's yet another bunch of traffic that they've ignored. So the only thing that's changed is traffic's gone up, and they've actually reduced it. And they've reduced their traffic, and Hearts Highways have just said, yeah, that's okay.
And I wanted to come on to the position of the Highways Authority. So it seems to be in CD 10.1, core document 10.1, there was an objection in terms of access, and that seems to have rumbled. Now, I know there's a point of clarification in the council's hearing statement. You know, hope to have this confirmed through a statement of common ground with Hearts County Council. What is the latest in terms of that statement of common ground between Hearts County Council on BK01?
Thank you, sir. So yeah, with the statement of common ground we have with the County Council ED 47, under section 3, we have the stage 3 matters. And 3.1, paragraph 3.1 and 3.2 relates to site allocations. I'll just repeat that. The parties agree that other than with the sites identified below, there are no outstanding issues of soundness on matters relating to the site-specific allocations in Chapter 12 of the Dacorum Local Plan. This includes in relation to education provision, specialist housing provision, public health, transport, access, highways impacts, and minerals and waste. And from there, I believe we go to that. With that, they did not have any, I'm just double checking before I say anything too much, but there was no specific concerns, requests for BKO1 in terms of modifications or issues of detail presented within that statement of common ground. So going back to that paragraph 3.1, 3.2, they're satisfied with this site in the context of highways and transport.
If we could just, sorry, just come in at this stage, just try and understand this in a bit more detail. So the plan as submitted has primary access provided via Chesham Road. What you're saying is since submission of the planning application has sort of taken that forward, and that's got effectively 3 access points, effectively sort of Chesham Road, Swingate Lane and Fieldway. 2 questions. First one is a point of clarity and it's probably directed at the site promoters. If the outline planning permission only had access from Chesham Road, is that right?
So the resolution relates to the three-way access strategy. So the three access points into the site, that has been consented under the resolution.
Yes. This is what I'm trying to get my head around it, and I'm struggling to understand it, is that, and again, it might be a question for the council to clarify. My understanding was that the outline plan permission was made with a single point of access onto Chesham Road. That was the access. That was an outline planning application with access from Chesham Road. Looking in both directions, I don't know whether that's right or wrong.
Sorry, I think I might have confused you. So when I say an outline planning permission, it is for the 3-way access scheme, but there's reserved matters, so detailed consideration of the Chesham Road access only. So at the time when the planning application was submitted, it was primary access on Chesham Road. That was assessed by the Highway Authority. Then through their detailed traffic study, which Mr. Harbidge referred to, detailed consideration, as part of that, the extra access points were identified as part of that. So
was the outline plan application changed then? What I'm trying to get to the bottom of is if you secure outline plan permission with access, you've applied for access from Chesham Road. How is your reserved matters then pursuant to that outline if you then have 2 other access points?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Is it, yeah. So, so the council is right. We've got detailed consent for the access off Chesham Road, and then the 2 extra access points, which are from Swingate Lane and Fieldway, are approved indicative access locations, and we will be applying for detail on those access points further through the planning process. So that
how do you do that? Reserved matters would surely be everything other than access. Your outline plan permission is granted permission with access from Chesham Road.
That's right.
So how then at reserved matters would you then use the other 2 access points? If only Chesham Road is approved, how then do you use the other 2 access points?
So the 2 other access points we would submit under access reserve matters when those phases come forward. To put it into context, the outline planning permission has an access and movement parameter plan which is approved, which identifies the detailed access point from Chesham Road and also identifies the indicative access locations from Swingate Lane and Fieldway. So that parameter plan is approved as correct, and they would come forward through future reserve matter applications. Well, you would either submit that as part of the RMA or as a separate reserve matter. I think it's likely to come through the RMA that's related to the phase that brings forward that access point.
Nothing further to add on that. I think from the context, I'll just put us where we are today, obviously in the plan-making position. I don't want to talk too much about other applications. I understand the discussion on this one. Needless to say, I think from the context where we've got to with the plan and the policies and what necessary, to make the plan sound, it's about understanding, what modifications are necessary to make that sound.
I think, I'm still not convinced. I'm certainly not convinced about the trajectory of delivering units in 26, 27. I gave the chap a hard time last week on a similar point. You don't have planning permission, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that you're going to deliver units in 2027. I just don't see that as realistic. You don't have a planning permission in place as we sit here today. You've got this resolution from November. We still don't have a planning permission. There is, I think, still uncertainty around these access points. I think the council suggested modification around primary access provided from Chesham Road, unless a more appropriate solution is identified and agreed, is vague, it's ambiguous, people don't know what that means. I think we need to understand from the council's position is, what is the access that's being provided here? We've heard from representatives they've got concerns and that they've raised concerns about these other access points. It's a little bit unclear as to what's been approved and what's been applied. I think you need to be really abundantly clear as to what the access point is. As the plan's submitted, and we don't want to delve too much into plan applications because Mr. Bristow is right, that's not for us. It is relevant in terms of delivery though. Where we need to be clear in terms of the local plan is, as submitted, the local plan says primary access to be provided from Chesham Road. What, and this is a question for the council, it's their plan, what is so inherently unsound with that we need to recommend a main modification to it? That's the first question. And the second part of that question is, what should it say to be effective?
Thanks, sir. So I think that's absolutely reasonable points on that. And again, when looking at this, it's about clarity. And this is where we go, well, how much clarity is necessary before it's necessary? And this is where we go on this. So, in terms of the point one, primary highway access to be provided via Chesham Road does give some flexibility that there is secondary access can be achieved also, and it doesn't preclude that. But I think in the context of if it is, in your view, necessary to the soundness, when you say that our suggested modification is a bit vague and ambiguous, I can understand that. So it is either it is fine as it is, or whether that particular requirement does need to be more specific about the other points of access if we feel it is necessary.
Yeah, we're all for additional flexibility and not putting things in local plans that sort of constrain developments coming forward. I think where we struggle with this one is, it sounds like the primary access will be from Chesham Road. That's what we're hearing, and that's what the plan says. I don't think we can support something that is a bit vague and saying, well, unless something else is done, because that would apply in any event. You're sort of saying, we're not really saying anything. So I think the plan as submitted, primary access via Chesham Road, fine. I think unless you can provide us with a real sort of robust reason as to there is a necessity for other points of access and they must be reflected in the local plan, then I don't think we could support that. And it goes back to the question of, is that sentence in the plan unsound? Probably not. That makes sense.
If I may, in terms of the proposed modification within the statement of common ground, so ED 12, from paragraph 3.24 onwards, this is in a matter agreed, where it says the site promoter continued their consultation with the Highways Authority, prompted amendments to the submitted access strategy. At that time, that access solution hadn't been agreed in principle between the site promoter and the Highways Authority. If you look at the decision report now, officer's report for the resolution to grant paragraph 2.9, 3 vehicular accesses to the site from Chesham Road, Swingate Lane and Fieldway have been assessed by Hertfordshire County Council as the Highways Authority and subject to condition legal agreements securing the details are considered to be satisfactory to serve a development of the scale and nature proposed without causing any unacceptable impact on the safety of the highway network.
I think it goes back to if there's a necessity for that change, and that's derived from the county council saying, actually, you know, it is going to be accessed from these points, and these are the reasons why, then we could consider that. I just don't think we have at this stage that, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the county council that this must be changed. And it must say, these are the two access points. That's where we're going with it.
I think what we will do is we'll take away an action on this one and consider whether, as the Highways Authority, feel that is necessary. And I note that they haven't specifically requested this modification themselves. So I think, you know, in light of the discussion on this, which I think has been helpful, we will consider that and carry any suggested modifications forward.
And I think that where the sort of where it's muddied slightly is a lot of this is obviously being driven by the planning application process, and again it's not for us to sort of delve too much into that, but only where it's relevant to the policy. And I'm not convinced that what I'm hearing is giving us the comfort that the county council has said, yes, we have seen detailed designs of these two access points, and yes, they can be provided. That's not what I'm hearing. So two tranches to that. I'm not hearing from the county council that the submitted plan is unsound by referring to primary access from Chesham Road, i.e. it needs to say two other access points. And secondary to that, even if they did, I'm not seeing from then, and we have seen detailed designs which show that this can be achieved. Which goes back to the fundamental question which we're here today to discuss. Is the submitted plan unsound? On that basis, probably not.
Thank you, Inspector. And I note everything you say. I think the structure of the outline planning application is that we applied for the detailed design of access from Chesham Road, and it's not unconventional to then, as part of that outline, apply for indicative access locations elsewhere. So that's part of the structures, as you know, and that's been approved. And those three access points have been approved in principle. We had 2 years of negotiation with HCC through the start, very extensive pre-application negotiation and post-submission. And as part of the August 2025 formal amendment, that's where the three-way access strategy was introduced through very detailed modelling between the applicant and critiqued independently from HCC's advisors to come to agreement that that was the appropriate solution. And just to add to the council's referencing to the committee report, the highway summary in the committee report between paragraph 12.4.25 to 12.429 sets out all of that in terms of agreement and actually cites that it's a fitted solution for this site in terms of that revised access strategy. I mean, you'll note also that their participant statement at paragraph 5.15 also states that.
Again, it's the council's plan. Is it unsound? No. However, we will leave it open to the council, should they wish to come back to us and say, it is unsound because it needs to say this. And again, it's that we can only recommend main modifications which are necessary for soundness. So if the council says yes, I think where the other difficulty you've got here is we don't, there's no planning permission in front of us. We don't have planning permission. It's not like the council say, look, here is a site with planning permission. We've got that decision notice. It went through a very detailed design, but actually it's specified approved access locations for A, B, C. Therefore, the plan needs to just catch up and reflect that. I don't think we're quite there. We don't have, again, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have planning permission in place. So as I said, I'll leave it with the council. We are obviously here to, to test the soundness of the plan. We're not here to stand in the way where things have been tested and agreed and to give flexibility, etc. As you'll see from our other modifications, I just don't think we've got enough before us to recommend a main modification to change that sentence. And I would reiterate, again, just looking at the council's trajectory, I think in the statement of common ground, I think you've got delivery of 50 units in 26, 27. It's just not realistic. You don't have planning permission in place. You'd have to discharge conditions, apply for reserved matters, some matters of detailed design, build and occupy 50 units in the next 12 months. I think, in the interest of fairness, I've said that to the council on other sites where they've got similar directories in place. We're not new to this. We've been doing this for a lot of years, and we've been sitting in a lot of inquiries for a lot of years. That just isn't a realistic trajectory. And so I'd invite the council to go away and just have a little bit of a sense check. Clearly we're not saying it's not deliverable, but I think you just need a little bit of a sense check around some of the numbers and when these are coming forward.
So we will do that, and we've got the two key points. One is to reflect on the wording of the policy to ensure that the council is satisfied it's sound or requires a modification to correlate in whatever way to the updated position on the planning resolution to grant. And we will reflect first about the current wording, which I noticed for the primary access. And there may be that already squares the circle, but I don't know until I have a look at the resolution to grant and take instructions. On the second point, may help you to know so that we've got that point in relation to one other site, I think New Mill, and it may well be that you want to share your initial thoughts tomorrow on another site. That's as far as we can take it at the moment. We've taken a note of those points, and we will take a further note on any points arising tomorrow. I just thought I'd make that point now so that you're not too anticipatory of turning things around before tomorrow.
I think in the initial trajectory, I see you had this one a year later. Yeah. Mr. Bristow?
Okay. I was wondering how we take this. Mr. Harbridge, let's hear from you. Then I think we've covered quite a lot already. We've covered a lot to do with boundaries, access, SANG. So what I might do after we've heard from you, Mr. Harbridge, is I might go through any questions I want to raise and some points I have and we have in terms of the effectiveness of the policy. And then we see if there are any more points in the round that we have on BK01. So, Mr. Harbridge.
Thank you. I'm a little unclear about the idea that it isn't unsound because of these reasons. As a whole, we've said from the beginning, nothing's been looked in a holistic manner, and we're talking about the access here being a problem and there not being planning permissions for the access. But that's not the only thing that's going to stop the build out. Thames Water's going to stop the build out with wastewater. I'll leave it at that. That is going to do it. All I would say to you is that when we've engaged with this, we've gone through and looked for factual things. And factually, what they're saying about the traffic and traffic generation is factually incorrect. They have left out data. They know they've left out data, even though Herts Highways just cut and pasted from the Savills response to respond to me. They admit that the data isn't there, and then they just say, but we can forget that. Their methodology is wrong. And I know you will have read all our submission, But I do, detail matters. And the fact is that they're suggesting that the traffic is going to be generated is going to be less than half what it will be generated. They then put that through a VDM model, variable demand model, which suggests that it's all going to dissipate down different roads. You can see from the video footage that all residents have taken, they've uploaded it, there would have been some links in the information we sent to you from the school. Thomas Coram did an aerial shot of what it's like at drop-off. That is the truth of what's happening on the ground. And there is a disconnect between what they're saying for the modelling. The modelling is only good if your starting points are good. And they are starting with poor data because it's been manipulated down. It hasn't just been manipulated down from the core strategy. Their original, when there was one access point only, their original submission had the traffic generation at one level. And then when they went to 3 access points, it then got reduced further because they've got 3 access points. That's traffic generation from the whole.
So just to pause on that point, so you obviously put these points as part of the planning application. You obviously put these points as part of the planning application in terms, and what response did you get from the county council or from the council on them, or what was their rationale in terms of the effects?
There is no rationale. They said at the DMC, they said, we're happy. That was their answer. None of the councillors, and obviously this is not the forum to work out, none of the councillors asked the questions. We did make a presentation. And you have in the appendix of our submission, you have our full correspondence with Hearts, because the Hearts Highways, because they do not respond. They responded once and it was cut and paste from the Savills letter answering our criticisms, which is accessible on the portal. And if you compare the two, it's a cut and paste.
Thank you. And absolutely. And you raised another point, which is water supply, which is here is affinity, I think. Good. Got that. Affinity water, Thames water, wastewater here. And that's a point that we've certainly heard about previously, and I just wanted to mention it because there's a representation on today that specifically, which is not from Bragg, but which specifically points to that. So I just wanted to sort of mention that for the record, that is on our minds as well.
They do have a plan. Affinity Water do have a plan to bring water into the general area along the canal. So they're going to have wastewater treated in Birmingham, and then put into the canal and shipped down to Lane Buzzard, and then extracted there and retreated for the general affinity area. That's their ongoing plan that's under consultation. But that's all we know. Apart from that, we just get our area gets extracted from the aquifers.
Okay. Is there anything that the council would like to say based on what we've just heard? Otherwise, if you're happy with what you've said, I will go through the questions that we have remaining.
Just want to cover a fairly detailed point on wastewater. So ED 39, page 81, confirms that outline application, as part of the outline application, Thames Water confirmed that there's capacity within the existing wastewater network to accommodate around 40% of the proposed dwellings. So that would be the first 3 years within their anticipated phasing programme.
And I think I sort of think almost into the buzzer in terms of we've been around the loop before in terms of the, what is required under the Water Industries Act, what people see happening. So we've very much got that point. So I've probably preempted what you wanted to say there. Okay. In terms of other questions, well, if we just go through them very quickly, the ones that are on the agenda, what is the site boundary based on? Well, we've talked about that. We've talked about some modifications, and we've heard implications for the green belt or not, and I've got very clearly the position of Bragg. So I don't need to ask any more questions on that. In terms of question 2, so summarising what we've heard, okay, the council's hearing statement refers to how the site was assessed in terms of the stage 2 Greenbelt review, the changes via the stage 3 Greenbelt review and its value there. We see that. We've also got the position very clearly from Bragg in terms of housing need itself, in their view, does not constitute exceptional circumstances. And if you look at what's happening around Berkhamsted, there's quite a considerable change to the nature of the green belt, and there's also, we're going to come on to BK04, which is within the green belt. So we've got those arguments very clearly. I had one question here in terms of, it was just a point that was made in Taylor Wimpey's hearing statement. So I think this is paragraph 7. So the justification for this site says the primary justification is the need to deliver the housing requirements set out in the plan, which are seeking to meet the standard method for housing as much as possible. Okay. There is also the need to deliver a range of other associated infrastructure and community facilities for this important market town and the borough as a whole. So I just wanted to understand very briefly to what extent what is being proposed here in terms of community facilities, infrastructure, if you like, relates to the allocation itself of 775 homes, and to what extent those facilities relate to acknowledged needs across Berkhamsted more broadly. That would be useful if you can give me an overview of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Inspector. You're quite right to point out that the allocation does identify most of those community facilities as part of the allocation, and those have all been reflected and provided within the outline resolution. I mean, I can run through that, but in terms of what was resolved to grant and which will be set out as planning obligations in the Section 106 agreement that we're currently working with the council on at the moment, the affordable housing at 40%, the extra care housing, custom build housing at 5%, education in the form of up to 2 form-entry primary school with contributions to HCC for build out and also towards SEN provision.
And just on that education, so that was one I wanted to raise, and there's a point of effectiveness in the policy, but is that purely related to the needs that would be generated by the development? Because you say, obviously, much needed infrastructure and community facilities for this important market town and the borough as a whole. So I just want to understand, is that purely related to the additional population that was result from this, or is that addressing an identified lack in school provision?
I think in terms of the education, and I'll come on to onto the secondary education point as well, that it's primarily to serve the development, but in terms of new residents, but also a benefit for the town as a whole, because it won't be restricted, obviously, to new residents. It will be existing residents that can benefit from that new primary school coming forward as part of the local centre.
Okay, thank you. And just one point while we're on education in terms of effectiveness, if we look at policy BK01 and we look at key development and land use requirements, it's the 3rd row. We have there a 2 form-entry primary school. That seems to be a key development requirement. If you then look at site-specific requirements, social and community provide land to deliver or contribute towards a new 2FE primary school, including nursery provision. So I think, and given that you've obviously come a long way in terms of the detailed design, that needs to be clear whether you are providing a school, you're providing land, or you're delivering or contributing towards that in terms of effectiveness. So, sorry, I'm probably not looking there. I'm looking there in terms of effectiveness, because you could meet that requirement either by providing a school, either by providing land,
I think that's a reasonable point on just on the effectiveness. I think it is expected it will be on site rather than contribute towards.
So there will be provision of a primary school on site.
Yes, I think, like you say, it's point of effectiveness and clarity. The wording isn't clear. It's provide land to either the site promoter, deliver the school themselves, or the land would contribute towards the delivery of a school. Yeah. But now we're at the detail, like you say.
I think just reflect on kind of on how that works in terms of what is a requirement, because again that goes back to timescale for delivery. Okay. Anything else that you'd like to mention in terms of what infrastructure this is contributing towards Berkhamsted?
Thank you, Inspector. I have got a fairly long list, so if I've got a bit of time just to do that, I'll summarise it.
But what I'm particularly interested
yeah.
in is things that the site is providing, consistent with your hearing statement,
yes.
for the market town. So
yes.
not related to offsetting the impact of the development per se, but what it's contributing, i.e. what contributes towards exceptional circumstances. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, understood. I mean, the education is a market town benefit, and we talked about the primary education. The land will be, just for clarity, the land will be safeguarded for that, and then a contribution will then be given to the Hertfordshire County Education Authority to then build out, just to clarify that, and there'll be a specific obligation in Section 106 for that purpose. There's a substantial education contribution payment, and I mentioned earlier the SEN contribution also. We talked about the on-site sports facility in terms of a sports hub, which will have the artificial grass pitch, the paddle courts, sports pavilion facilities, etc. So that will be a commitment under a community use agreement, as will the pitches for the school. Off-site sports facility contributions, there's a list here, which I can run through: cricket pitches, hockey pitches, rugby pitches, etc., etc. So that again is a town benefit, because there's a contribution, quite a significant one, to an existing a forthcoming sports hall, which is coming forward and which we're contributing towards. On-site provision, there will be a strategic healthcare facility, so an on-site medical building, which has been positioned to the north of the local centre to allow existing residents to access that easily. That's situated within the local centre, where there will be a retail building, community building and nursery building, again not restricted to new residents, but existing residents to have access to those facilities. And then more integral to the development is the strategic open space and play areas, SANG provision, the off-site highway improvements, which is a very long list, and financial contributions towards some of those mitigations, to include contributions towards bus routes, a travel plan, ambulance contribution. So all of these obligations are being worked through the Section 106 agreement as we speak.
Thank you. That's helpful, and that raises a point I wasn't aware of. That then you say SANG provision. Again, sorry, just coming back to SANG. The criteria in the policy is to deliver the suitable alternative natural green space, which we've heard is permitted. So this is effectively, I don't want to use the term enabling development. So without BK01, you couldn't deliver Haresfoot Farm, is that what you're saying? Because that SANG provision is a benefit?
It's an off-site provision, and there will be a trigger within the Section 106 in terms of its delivery. It's already consented for SANG purposes, but you're absolutely right, Inspector, it is linked to BK01, and it will be a provision within the Section 106 agreement.
Okay, thank you. Right.
Yes, a clarification perhaps, maybe from Dacorum. But we understand, in fact, that the County Highway Education Authority are now saying a new primary school is not required. Secondly, we're also told that the Health Authority no longer require a health hub that's planned. And I think retail has just been mentioned. I think the idea that a single retail unit, which is what's proposed, would get off the ground, let alone survive in a location like that, I think, if I may put it that way. So therefore, the questions are being raised now about the supposed community benefits arising from this development. And my final point, I think, is on reference was made to off-site highway improvements. There are a lot of mitigations proposed around the town, and I think it's fair to say that the majority of them are required because of the development. So arguably they are not actually improvements, they're simply dealing with the increased problems that the development traffic is going to create. So I don't regard that as a benefit. It is something which possibly is more like essential.
So I'll take those points and I'll turn to the council in terms of, well, education, health and highway improvements. To what extent those, in the council's view, associated with the scheme are of wider benefit or just effectively relate bluntly to addressing the effects of the development proposed?
So I'm going to go back to the responses, so Regulation 20 representations, firstly. So the NHS ICB, and then on PDF page 10, they actually requested a modification to include the provision of a medical centre within the key development land use requirements. We considered that the provision of a medical centre would be an acceptable use within a local centre, but that shows that that would be required on the site. If I turn to Hertfordshire County Council's Regulation 20 representation, and it's PDF page 80, paragraph 5.18, they've said, at the primary phase, a new school site capable of delivering up to 2 forms of entry at BK01 is supported, and that would be sufficient to ensure demand in this locality can be met as locally as possible. I'll turn to Mr. Loden if you've got any points on highways.
Yeah, just to sum it up from a plan-making perspective, we did a specific piece of work, looked at sustainable transport study for Berkhamsted and Tring, that's TRAO 2.1. And sitting underneath that is a raft of appendices. So Appendix A, challenge audit for Berkhamsted exists, that's TRAO 2.2. And we also have the interventions performance TRAO 2.4, which is Appendix C, and that lists the in detail intervention performance. And I think when it comes to the off-site improvements, and this has been worked up and supported with input of Hertfordshire County Council, it is there to address the requirements of Local Transport Plan 4, and also takes account of the planned growth. So when it looks at that, it looks at key corridors between certain allocations, such as BK01 as well as others, and looks at their connectivity between, say, the town centre, the railway station, and to a lesser extent, Berkhamsted, key areas of employment as compared to Hemel, which has some significant areas. But it does look at those interventions and how we can get people more sustainably and safely moving across. So, along those corridors and those areas, it's expected that mitigation and those improvements will be of wider benefit to those communities that are served by those corridors also. And just on the final point of retail, we do have ECNO 1.1, which is our retail study, which does provide guidance on. We felt it was appropriate. Sometimes retail can be hard to determine, but quite often I've seen allocations where people saying you don't need retail on that on a big site, only for once it's nearing completion, suddenly says, oh, we do need a supermarket in this area. I've seen examples of that in plans I've worked on before. So I think what we have done is done a little piece of work through our retail study that looks at where these, provision is likely to be more viable. And our evidence points towards the need for a very small scale retail unit within some of our larger allocations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I'm conscious we've been going for a while, and let's 2 seconds. In terms of heritage, that's question 3. I don't have any questions because we've got we've got the evidence before us. We know Historic England have suggested a main modification which would be covered anyway by a general policy in terms of heritage, and we will go out on site. We've talked through question 4 in terms of access in detail. Mr. Berkinshaw, and to a lesser extent I, have made some points in terms of question 5, which is anticipated delivery timing. Allied to that, we put in that question requirements for master planning and design codes, and I think you've got a fairly clear indication of where we're coming out on that. It probably leads us, therefore, to question 6. Now, this is probably a point to say, well, are there any points anyone wants to raise that we have not on BK01? And I know there is certainly one flag up there. There are a couple of points I have on effectiveness. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't know if this is the same with Mr. Berkinshaw, we've explored the issues very well cited on the arguments on those questions other than sort of question 6. So, Mr. Harbridge.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to pick up the council on the fact that they said that the health centre is required. It's not. In the statements have been put in, they put in saying it's no longer required. On terms of education, in all the evidence that the council put forward, including the post-stage 1 ED 39 and 40, it was all about secondary education. This is giving money to secondary education, but so is every other site that would have been considered. If you look at the budget planning, the March 2025 one, those are split up between every site. The thing that they're proposing is a primary school, and that's not physically for numbers required. The secondary schools were offered up at 2 other sites, but council in stage 1 said this was the only site that offered educational possibilities. That's not true. Contributions to Ashlings are spread across all sites, and there were 2 other sites that put forward secondary education, not primary education, and through all the evidence, it wasn't primary education that was a problem, it was secondary education that was a problem. So I'd just like to clarify that.
Council like to comment on that?
Thank you, sir. It's a very broad brush point again, and I think it goes back to, I'll look into the weeds of exceptional circumstances, but the reasons for why we are allocating the sites we are allocating. And it's to basically demonstrate that, you know, settlements cannot grow and expand within the confines of their existing boundaries. And with that, where they go, we need to ensure that the infrastructure is planned effectively. And we've taken account, you know, in the context of Berkhamsted, when we look at the sites, and without delving into detail, the omission sites for Berkhamsted, how many of them are not seeking to deliver any additional infrastructure, i.e. no one really is looking at new primary schools and secondary schools except for the largest sites. And that's a general rule of thumb. And this site, in terms of what it's looking at in provision, is looking to deliver primary school education on site. And in the absence of a site that can deliver primary school education, I struggle to understand how we can allow these settlements to grow and expand in a sustainable manner if there are no such solutions being provided elsewhere. When it comes to secondary education, you know, we've worked closely with the county council on these requirements, and again, perhaps reflected within their statement also that ultimately they believe that the growth within Berkhamsted can be delivered. The scale and quantum of growth for Berkhamsted can be delivered, you know, within the context of existing secondary school provision, with the potential that may be able to expand. And we continue to work with them on that. But it's an important point. It's part of the whole strategy of this plan. When we look at Hemel, Berkhamsted and Trig, you know, when we're looking at this, the 15, 16, 17,000 homes that we're being asked to plan for, we do need to find solutions. We do need to find schools. We do need to find GP provision. We do need to be planning effectively for that in a plan-led approach. And for that reason, you know, what we have sought to do and the level and extent of work we've done on infrastructure delivery, the 900 rows we have within our schedule for the IDP, costed, you know, attributed, have prioritised, looking at how they'll be secured, who'll deliver them. You know, we've done a lot of work in understanding this, probably more than I've ever seen in any plan I've been involved in to date. So in the context of that, and in the context of the lack of objections from the County Council towards the project, particularly in Berkhamsted, we feel that the strategy and the approach to infrastructure is sound.
Okay, thank you. So my last points in terms of, and now I'm moving to an effectiveness level, if you like, in terms of how the policy is set out. We've talked about clarification in terms of the key development and land use requirements, talked about time scale. There's a master planning requirement here. There's also a design code requirement here. Now, in this instance, because of the scale, it may be that phasing master planning and design codes, that's legitimate. But again, that points to the timescale being rather challenging. If I move, we've talked about being clear, haven't we, in terms of the access, highways, and sustainable transport approach. We've talked about social and community infrastructure criterion. There are some interesting environmental health constraints. Again, being from Devon, radon protective measures is an interesting one that crops up here, and I did wonder if that and the site waste management in particular plan are covered by other policies that we've talked about already, or if there's a specific need here. Again, just to reiterate, if there's a specific need, add it in. If there's not, keep it as a general policy. That would be our line, really. In terms of landscape considerations, I struggled with this one slightly. So you've in there, in other applications, say for example, we're going to come on to Markyate later. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I may be pronouncing that entirely wrong, but there's the requirement for a landscape and visual impact appraisal. There's not here. That may be because that work has been done or is in train, but there's a difference there in terms of the criteria. There are also a few things in there in terms of road noise and views of pylons. I'm just not entirely clear what that, in terms of effectiveness, what someone would do with that in terms of landscape. So I'll leave that, you know, this is almost like a recap, isn't it, I suppose, of things we've identified in terms of effectiveness of other policies. And again, what is the long green wildlife site? So it may be the long wiggly thing by the plain pictures, but just in terms of clarity, is it a local wildlife site? Is it a priority habitat? Where is it? What is it? What's the aim there? Just in terms of effectiveness, those are the points I had, and I hope they're fair observations looking at that critically. Were there any other points anyone wants to make on BK01? Spoken control? No. Okay. Tree break. Come back at 12. On to BK02. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Let's adjourn back at 12. Okay, it sounds from the slightly awkward silence like everyone's ready. Thank you for being here so punctually, unlike myself. BK02, then, if I could maybe Miss Mitchell, if I could turn to you first for any updates in terms of its planning status. I suspect not, but just to be clear, thank you.
So BK02, the British Film Institute site, allocated for around 100 dwellings and a replacement facility instead for moving image conservation, training skills, research with associated public open space. Proposed to deliver from 2038 to 39, no changes to its planning status since the submission of the plan.
Okay, so this is a developable site by the council's perspective, delivering towards the tail end, and that, as I understand it, that appears to be on account of the replacement film facility. So that will take some time. Okay, so just going through our questions again, I've got some points on effectiveness, but not to step aside from Bragg's overarching point in terms of a lack of a coherent strategy from their perspective in terms of Berkhamsted, which is very well registered with us. I was looking at the stage 2 Greenbelt review. That's CSN 0801. As I have it there, BK02, I think I'm right in saying, was one which was assessed to make the weakest contribution to the purposes of the Greenbelt. I think that's right. Yeah, okay. One question I had, just immediately having been there, it looks like there's some contextual change from potentially from what is mapped there. You've got, is it development next door, the Denton, perhaps, to the west? Is that a recent development?
I believe that's the previous allocation from the previous site allocations development plan document that has come forward as a care home.
Gotcha. That explains it. And sorry, that was a horrible question to start on, wasn't it? Really. It was just a question as to whether the mapping is up to date. The base mapping that's being used, I'm not sure, but that's by the by. I was then looking at criterion 2 under urban design principles. Development should normally be 2 stories in height. And I just wonder if that needs a little bit of reflection in terms of design, given what has occurred on the ground next to it. But that was just an immediate observation from going there and going, this doesn't match up with the map necessarily. Okay, so I don't have a lot to talk about actually in terms of BK02. If I just run through sort of our thinking, where our understanding, if you like, in terms of the question. So question 1, what are the site boundaries based on? Well, they are readily recognizable on the ground. We've talked about the assessment in the stage 2 Greenbelt review. That was also looked at the stage 3 Greenbelt review. So that's questions basically 1 and 2. I didn't have any points on those, and I'm slowing my natural inclination to go quite quickly through that down in case there were any points anyone particularly wanted to raise on questions 1 and 2. Our question 3 was, is the loss of employment land justified? Now, we don't have anyone from the British Film Institute, but I've carefully read their hearing statement. In terms of the intention, it's not simply a replacement, it's actually a sort of reconfigured facility that they see coming forward. And I think the council's position is that would actually, if anything, increase the level of employment provision. So that was a poorly phrased question on my part. Okay, and that accounts for the timescale for delivering. Now, again, if we move on to question 4, our question 4 was, would access via Kingshill Way be a suitable arrangement? The council's position, as I have it, is in short, the answer is yes. given that we wouldn't have allocated if it weren't, but the constraints seem to be heritage related. And there's a statement of common ground that I've seen with the site promoter that there could be a further access created in time if that sort of heritage constraint limits what can be achieved with the existing access. And that's again noting that there are points made by Bragg in terms of an overarching assessment, given that this site is closely located to BK01 and BK03. So I don't need to ask any questions on that particularly. If we come on to question 5 then, which is a suitable account being taken of landscape, heritage and biodiversity implications. Again, looking back at the landscape study, the existing nature of the site, low to moderate landscape sensitivity. Historic England do point to the need for what they consider to be necessary in terms of a detailed heritage impact assessment. But I think we've covered that broadly, haven't we, in terms of our position on that. I've got a very few points in terms of effectiveness of drafting, but we're dealing with a sort of a qualitatively different site to BK01. Having walked around this one, it's sort of very different in nature. Are there any points before I go through some on effectiveness that I had? Any points anyone wants to raise on BK02? Okay. And again, maybe this is a bit of a recap, so if I just say what's on my mind. We've got the design codes requirement, again, for a scheme of 100 homes. Not convinced that's necessary. I've talked about criterion 2 in terms of the context as it seems changed on the ground, so you just might want to reflect on that provision. Development should normally be 2 stories in height. I'm not entirely convinced that's justified, given that there are other provisions in terms of landscape considerations, which just under landscape considerations talks about a strong boundary, a defensible boundary towards the A41 to the south, which makes sense to me. The only real, well, we've talked about Sang as well, but the only real point was under social and community, and you know what we're going to say here. The first preference is that a replacement facility for moving image conservation, training and skills, that seems to be actually what the allocation is for, rather than it being a preference. Any other points on BK01? No. Okay, sorry, BK02. Okay, then if we move on to BK03, again, any update from the council, any introduction you want to give on BK03, or, well, logically we take BK03 and BK04 together.
Absolutely. So BK03 allocated for around 100 dwellings once replacement sports facilities have been provided on site BK04. There is a change in planning status. An application for the BK04 site was validated on the 9th of March 2026. So that's since the deadline of the stage 3 hearing statements.
So there's an application in for what would be proposed at BK04, and that was validated in March. Ooh, very recently. And just, if you might, talk me through these. Well, I say BK04 is intended to be a developable site, but it's effectively for sports and leisure facilities. But in terms of BK03, how the two interact, BK03, the around 100 dwellings could only be occupied once provision at BK04 is up and running, all singing, all dancing. Is that correct? Ready and available. And that, in the council's view, would be achievable in BK04. That would be achievable by 2032-33, and therefore you could sort of twin track, if you like, development at BK03, so that development occurs 2033-34, so shortly thereafter. Is that correct?
So there's been a change in position within our hearing statements. It's paragraph 6.157. That reflects the statement of common ground, where we suggested that the BK04 site would commence in 2027-28, and then completions would be delivered on BK03 from 2030 to 31. And that's mainly on the basis that the site's now within the catchment of an implemented SANG solution at Westbrook Hay. So it reflects another proposed modification I know we've discussed, where we've changed from Hill Farm Gateway to Westbrook Hay. So that would give sufficient confidence that that site could be deliverable, given that SANG is in place, it's been implemented.
Thank you. So the reason that I was tapping away there is, in terms of that's a change in terms of timing. In terms of boundaries, I believe there are some minor boundary changes that have been proposed. And I was just trying to load those and failed. Minor boundary changes, a small northeastern corner in private ownership. Is that effectively, if I can call it this, a tidying up amendment? Yeah.
Yes, exactly right. It's a small tidying up to make sure that all the land is in Berkhamsted Schools Group's ownership and that land by a third party is not included.
Presumably from the council's perspective, there's no issue with that. Okay.
No, we agreed that within an addendum to the statement of common ground.
Does anyone have any points that they want to raise on questions 1 or 2, I suppose we are? What are the site boundaries based on, and are they justified and effective? And again, I'm going to say that I'm very well aware, and I think it came out in a previous session, of Bragg's position that effectively the sort of coherency of moving school provision, of moving sports provision into the Greenbelt and releasing Greenbelt at the existing playing fields is, in their view, a curious approach, if I can call it that. But I've got that position. Insofar as anyone wants to make any other observations on questions 1 or 2. Okay, if we're talking about accessibility, and again, very well aware of arguments in terms of accessibility to Berkhamsted in terms of the topography in particular. Question 3 was, are sites BK03 and BK04 in suitably accessible locations, and would highways effect be acceptable? I just wanted to focus on really the observation of the county council, who say there should be an amendment to this. I don't know if you're there in terms of their hearing statement. I think it's paragraph 5.3.1, and this is to BK03. Their suggestion is an amendment to trying to find exactly where this is proposed. But
Sorry, sir, it's point 2 of urban design principles in BK03.
thank you, point 2 of urban design principles. Yeah, so instead of point 2 of access highways, where you could see I was looking. Okay, so that's to provide adoptable, so capable of being of that standard, through routes for all modes to the safeguarded land to the southeast of the site, offer for adoption to the highways authorities. This is practically sort of assuring that what is provided there is of adoptable standard. What's the council's view on that?
We believe that this is based on a slight misunderstanding of what's being proposed in both locations. So on the map on page 158 of CD01 shows the area that's proposed to be retained within the greenbelt, and then that's next door to the area that was also proposed to be delivered for biodiversity net gain enhancements as part of BK01. So we had a requirement in that there should be some kind of connection to both areas of open space. However, now we know that that safeguarded land at Kings Hill Way isn't being promoted for anything. We consider that that requirement for a through route is likely to fall away, let alone it being for vehicular access, but that it wouldn't be an appropriate spot for a vehicular access. It wasn't that kind of route.
I think that's right. So I think what we're saying actually is that urban design principle 2 is just deleted. Yeah. And that also would get around the point that safeguarded land. Now, I don't know if this crops up elsewhere. So safeguarded obviously has a particular meaning in greenbelt terms. And as far as I was aware, that land which was safeguarded as part of BK01 for biodiversity net gain, which we've established isn't needed as part of that, wouldn't be safeguarded in any event. But it might just be worth a check, and I haven't done a sort of control F, if in any other sense there is safeguarded land referred to in greenbelt, just to double check that there's no terminological confusion with what safeguarded land is in the MPPF, which is to meet longer term development requirements. Okay. Any other points in terms of suitability of location, highways effects? Okay. Question 4 then was, has suitable account been taken of landscape and archaeological implications? Now, one point I want to ask is, we'll obviously want to go on a site visit, and I'm sure we can see, well, I know because I've driven around there, actually you can see sort of partially into the site. But in terms of going into that site, whose permission would we need? We need your permission?
Yes, because they're both school sites, permission would be required, and a accompanied visit as well.
Excellent, thank you for setting that out. When we do that, we'll be sure to be in touch. Now, the reason I raised that is because we're on question 4, landscape and archaeological implications. Again, you set out very clearly what the landscape sensitivity study has said. Moderate susceptibility refers to adjacent area of archaeological significance, but not extending into the site. So obviously there's nothing we would want to investigate in terms of archaeology, but if we feel there is a need to go on site, we will be in touch to look at landscape implications and the like. That's helpful. Any other points on question 4? Okay. Any potential impediments to delivery is question 5. Apparently there's, I heard from your hearing statement, there was a planning performance agreement at an advanced stage. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. We've got a PPA that covers both sites. As you've heard, the BK04 site has been submitted and is validated. BK03 is about a month behind, but has completed its pre-app. We've had that written response and is due to be submitted very shortly.
Thank you. Which leads, I suppose, on to question 6, which is an overarching catch-all question. Are allocations BKO3 and BKO4 justified? Now, we've got a representation from Crest Nicholson who've been at previous sessions who talk about the differential approach in their view that they consider has been taken to site selection, but we're very well aware of that in terms of their overarching position, which is effectively goes back to site selection. Again, we're aware of that. The various main modifications that the council has suggested in terms of delivery timing, the SANG that we've talked about, the boundary change, which we've covered, all those seem logical, and in terms of, yes, timing of delivery. I don't have any comments on that. The criteria around BKO4 are very limited. So from my perspective, I didn't want to raise any other questions. So this is the point in proceedings where I ask if there's anything that we haven't raised on BKO3, BKO4 that you want to discuss, that anyone wants to raise. Okay. Then we did say, didn't we? We go straight on to allocations at Grange Farm, Bovingdon, and London Road. Before we do, I'm very conscious, I don't want to race through too quickly. If there are other things that you want to say, this is the opportunity to talk about Berkhamsted. If there's anything you want to raise, okay. So let's take, Mr. Berkishaw, should we take just sort of 5 minutes, a very short break, because I'm conscious people are not necessarily here for allocations at Grange Farm and London Road. Okay. Thank you very much. So 5 minutes, 12:30, we'll come back and we'll deal with those allocations. Thank you. Okay, thank you. We started a minute early, making up for the 2 minutes I was late previously. So, allocations at Grange Farm, Bovingdon, and London Road Markyate. Now, that if we start obviously with Bovingdon, Grange Farm, this illustrates a sort of a conundrum that crops up at examinations, whether an allocation is sound if development is underway, or you know, does it make much odds? But there is a conundrum here, I think, in terms of Grange Farm, which is, as I understand it, so we'll come to the council in a second, that what's proposed in the allocation is perhaps not exactly matching up with what is being delivered or what has permission. So there is, I suppose, a question of how much do we get involved in that discussion in terms of an allocation if there is no need for that allocation, given that what is being permitted is being delivered anyway. So there's a bit of a sort of logical toing and froing in my mind at the moment. But Ms. Mitchell, can you bring us up to speed with what's going on then at Grange Farm?
Certainly. So in my response to question 1 of issue 7, I note that the Grange Farm site now benefits from full planning permission. The site's now under construction, and first completions were due in the 25-26 financial year. So we've recommended that the table in policy H1 is amended to reflect that this is now a commitment for Bovingdon as opposed to an allocated figure. It's also reflected in the commitments for Bovingdon within the updated trajectory, so that would just bring those two into line. We consider that the Grange Farm allocation policy wouldn't be necessary to guide development, given that the whole site has got full permission and is under construction. Although we are still recommending that the site is removed from the green belt.
And can you talk me through, so just in terms of, this may be one that we have to have a think about, just in terms of whether it's necessarily we recommend it as a main modification for soundness that it's taken out, etc., that sort of intricacy. But can you just talk me through the key development requirements around 217 dwellings? Is that consistent with the planning permission? Because I think there was something about older persons or C2 use class that may be being delivered separately. So it was just understanding how what is here in the plan maps up, maps up, that's not a phrase, maps against what is actually being permitted and what is coming forward.
Thank you, yes. So being clear, 2 and 7 is basically C3 plus C3 equivalent of that C2 scheme. So it is, in essence, in terms of housing supply and the numbers that you count towards 5-year supply, including the C2 equivalent, that's reflective of that. Within paragraph 7.1a of our response, we set out the application details, full application at the time for 57 dwellings, and then further down, outline application for 129. That makes, I think, 186. And then you have the 59 extra care accommodation use class C2. So I think then that makes up the remainder of that 217 once you just do that conversion.
Yeah, and can you just, I mean, I know this is more a point for tomorrow, but just in terms of that conversion between C2 and C3, can you just refresh my memory in terms of what that is, what that proportion or that ratio is?
So that is, the PPG advises it's based on the average number of adults per household within the borough, and for Dacorum that is 1.8 adults per household. So we use that in terms of bedrooms, I think, to determine in terms of bed space, converting that into a household rate.
Thank you. I don't know what Mr. Berkhamsted thinks. I think we'll need to just have a think about either whether sort of our recommendation is that this allocation be deleted, which is probably where we're leaning to, or there are some tweaks in terms of effectiveness and consistency with the with the numbers or with the provisions so that they match up to what has been allocated.
So it's always tricky with ones like this that are under construction. I think just because a site is under construction, I don't think necessarily means it's unsound as an allocation, because you could get into a situation, presumably where development stalls or a different type of development comes back around, or there's a change in the type of development sort of midway through where other criteria in your policy would have been useful. It's a matter of judgment, and it's a matter of, clearly a development that was right at the very end, it was in its final phase. Yes, we'd probably just say it doesn't really make sense, because for people using the plan, they'd look at the map and say, why is this an allocation? It's clearly a housing site. So it really does depend on how far these developments have got. As I said before, it's your plan. I think we're probably pretty open to, your position on it. If you think, actually, this is still quite early on in the delivery of this site, and we need to almost protect ourselves in case there is a change scheme that comes forward, and some of these things in the development requirements would then still be relevant, then keep it in. Obviously, we'd have to modify it to just, reflect what's been approved. But if you say, well, actually, no, look, this is well underway, it's pretty much finished, it would become confusing for members of the public to see it as an allocation, then we'd support you in deleting it. So it's one of those, it goes with all the sites that have, got planning permission. Some of them you'll see in plans get deleted. It really is a case of how far along they've got to. But it's your plan, and we'll sort of support you in which way you want to go with those, really.
Okay, thank you. So London Road. Again, just any update in terms of planning status that we need to be aware of?
No update in the planning status for this site.
So could the council just remind me, so obviously looking through the sort of you have to go to regulation 19 responses to find some sort of comments on this. The concerns about, obviously, traffic will come on to sewage, discharge and capacity. Just remind me, if you might, where we would go to see anything that Thames Water or Affinity Water have commented on London Road, if indeed they have, as opposed to, also where we might go to see their general kind of representations in terms of the plan. Can you just remind me of that, so we can go away and set those responses to Regulation 19 consultation against anything that Thames Water or Affinity Water have said.
So we've reflected comments made by the water providers within ED 39. So that's 146 to 148. I can see Ronan's trying to load the page on where the ID numbers are for these comments. But they're all on the responses to the Regulation 19 consultation website as part of our examination, sort of overarching examination site. Apologies, I don't have those IDs to hand.
Okay, there's obviously a lot of information in your hearing statement on London Road about crossing the river, alternative arrangements. Nothing, it seems, amounting to a fundamental impediment. There is a suggested change to policy TC1 that have we talked about it, the monitor and manage approach. Yeah, we've probably talked about that. In terms of the points I had, so in terms of effectiveness, and again, sorry, this is sort of, I'm sounding like a broken record, but if we just look through, and we're starting with urban design principles, 1, design codes, you've got that. Access highways and sustainable transport. Access to the site is to be provided via London Road and limited to the area identified in blue on the map above. Now, I understand what that seeks to do. If I was being hypercritical, I might say that the location of access looks purple, but you know, let's leave that to one side. But in terms of the purpose of that, it's to avoid, presumably, development within areas which are more vulnerable to flooding, and also to avoid exacerbating any existing flooding issues. So I think it would just be to translate that one criterion 1 into what's the purpose of it? It's purposive rather than perhaps identifying it on a map. But that's, you know, I will leave that with you. And if we then go on to environmental health, we've got condition 1. Consideration should be given to controlled waters. I think we might have talked about avoiding any contamination to controlled waters. Again, we've talked about, if we come on to landscape considerations, we talked about broad points in terms of landscape and visual impact appraisal policy. I forget the number of that policy immediately. Again, as with, I think it was it BKO2 perhaps? Just looking through the sort of the particular landscape sensitivities here, I'm not entirely convinced on a few of them. So presumably, actually, it's integrating with the existing development pattern of Markyate at criterion 1. And potentially, if you're doing that, well, the screening of urbanising influences around along London Road isn't necessary because you've got a very clear linear pattern of development anyway at Markyate from what I saw. So just having a think about whether those are, you know, very specific requirements or whether they would be covered in any event. I couldn't help but spot under biodiversity and green infrastructure, it looks like criterion 2 and 4 are duplicating in terms of chalk stream priority habitat. And potentially criterion 5, talking about a WFD assessment, which I presume is in the glossary, but probably Water Framework Directive assessment. We have it appears here that if we're under criterion 8 in terms of biodiversity and green infrastructure, there is a SANG solution, if I can call it that, at the Studham Commons suitably, the Studham Commons SANG. Okay. Then we come on to flood risk and drainage. Again, the point there in terms of no development taking place with areas of high vulnerability goes back as well to the access point I made. There's just a couple of last points. Under flood risk and drainage, there's any development within 8 meters of a main river. So presumably that's the VER, will require a flood risk activity permit from the Environment Agency. I wondered how it was different to criterion 3 of biodiversity and green infrastructure. Development should provide a minimum 10-meter ecological buffer. And if you're providing that 10-meter buffer, do you also need to provide an 8-meter activity permit? Is that covered in any event by separate legislation? It's just logic. I'm not sure that these amount to matters of soundness, but just so people are clear exactly what is required, and so that doesn't trip things up. Okay, and I think that was the last point I had in terms of effectiveness there. Did anyone else have any points that they wanted to raise on London Road? No? Just to clarify, this is my last point, this is a deliverable site from the council's perspective, 2029-30. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
And the evidence behind that position, sorry, I'm probably not phrasing this particularly, but the evidence behind that delivery anticipation, given that it's not got planning permission, again, seems on the ambitious side, particularly in terms of access arrangements that need to be created, the single span bridge and the like. The justification for it being a deliverable site, what can we take into account in that respect?
So firstly, I point to the statement of common ground between us and the site promoters, that's DBC ED 22. And that sets out the agreement on the trajectory. Whilst they didn't make any hearing statements, I did receive some correspondence by email from the site promoter who've confirmed that they now have a house builder engaged with the site as well, and that technical work has begun.
That's helpful. In terms of the, so again, you can see where our sort of mind goes. In terms of the sang, that's the Studham Common, is that up and running?
Yes, that one is live. It is within central Bedfordshire, so this is another area we don't have our own direct solutions, but Studham Common sits on the boundary with Dacorum. It's within reasonable distance. I think it's about 2 or 3 kilometres from Markyate. And we have, in principle, agreement with Central Bedfordshire that we can use part of that capacity because they do not have, what I understand, on the current plan, there isn't sufficient homes planned for within the catchment of that area. They're quite happy that we can give some, and we have used that sign already for other proposals, windfall proposals around Markyate in the last 12 months.
So, I mean, I'm just going to say, I think in the absence of a planning permission, we're looking at clear evidence, we're not, of deliverability in terms of 5 years. What we do have a, as you say, DBC ED22, that statement of common ground with an agreed trajectory, but I don't think there's much substantive beyond that. And just from a quick look, in terms of the river, in terms of access provision, that does seem rather optimistic to me. But okay. Any other comments on London roads?
Very quickly, I may be looking in the wrong place. There's an appendix to your Matter 5 hearing statement, which I think is the updated trajectory. Is this site in that updated trajectory?
Yes, it is south of London Road. Whether we put the reference as MK01, it's a minor.
Okay. So the MK01 is a reference then that should be modified and referred to in the plan. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, unless there's anything else, thank you for everyone letting us go straight into allocations at Grange Farm and London Road. That was useful. We've got a bit of a break then before tomorrow morning, where we're back at 9:30, looking at various housing policies before coming on to total housing land supply, 5-year land supply in the afternoon session, and we do have to break between the two. I think we can't run them on just one after the other because there are different participants if we did make good progress in the morning. Any last points before we close? No. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contributions. Mr. Siegel.
We'd just like to thank the two of you. We think you've given us a fair hearing and a fair reading of what we've submitted, and we do appreciate it. We may not have got the process right all the time, but thank you.
No, thank you. That's very kind, and thank you to you and to everyone for their contributions and participation. That's been really useful in terms of our understanding, and we've got a lot to think about. So thank you. Okay, let's adjourn, and we'll see everyone at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Brilliant. Thank you.